The opposition reply.
Practical implications. This is what this debate's all about, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? So let's discuss what practical implications is before moving on to asking the fundamental question of does the G20 actually have the power to make change? So what is practical implication? Making progress, taking steps towards problem solving, ladies and gentlemen. They seem to portray a picture in which a practical implication has to be a complete solution to a global problem. But ladies and gentlemen, is that really a fair or is that really a practical answer or a practical definition of practical implications, ladies and gentlemen? We're getting there. We're taking steps towards a fundamental solution. Then there is practical solution. Then there is practical implication because there is value in the actions and the steps that are being taken, ladies and gentlemen. The government's only major point in today's debate was that a complete solution was not here and therefore there's no practical implication. We provide you two levels of refutation to this, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, negotiations by their very nature take a very long time. Take, for instance, the Korea-USA FTA, ladies and gentlemen. How long did that take? It's not even concluded as of now. The current system of the G20 summits have only been established in 2008, and you expect a complete settlement, a complete solution in 3 years, ladies and gentlemen? We believe that the idea that they're trying to portray is impractical, ladies and gentlemen. We showed you how steps were being taken, how we were making progress. We were taking steps towards the solution, and we believe that can qualify as practical implications. And also, moving on to the more fundamental question about does the G20 have the power to make change? Firstly, about representation. As our wonderful whip told you, 85% of the global GDP, 80% of world trade, and 4 billion people are represented by the 20 member organizations of the G20, 19 states plus the European Union. But moreover, we see that international organizations are invited, in addition to observer states, ladies and gentlemen. International organizations like the OECD, the United Nations, which has over 180 member states, ladies and gentlemen, and other organizations like the IMF, the World Bank, and the African Union have been invited. The president of Malawi came to Seoul to represent the African Union, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that a variety of voices are being heard in these G20 summits and these G20 meetings. Also, we believe that even if the G20 lacks justification in terms of only including 20 nations, it's not really relevant to today's motion. Today's motion is not whether the G20's composition is justified. It's about whether the G20 has practical implications, whether it can actually do something, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe because we clearly show you through tangible examples how the G20 actually contributed to solving major problems of the status quo, we believe that their reputation cannot stand. On the second subpoint about the ability to bring tangible change, they provided no rebuttal to our argument about the tangible changes that took place in the Gyeongju Agreement, the London Summit, the Seoul Summit. They ignore all of this, ladies and gentlemen. Also, we showed you how getting rid of the unnecessary bureaucratic procedure contributes greatly to improving effectiveness. Yet, this point they already dropped. And all they said was that the head of states being there only means that that they don't have the expertise to come up with practical solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, we rebutted this by showing you that the real case is that Sherpas and many experts do go with the head of states and contribute to decision making, and in addition, that thorough reviews prior to G20 meetings do take place on major agendas. Lastly, on press and businesses, over 4,288 members of the press came to the Seoul Summit, ladies and gentlemen. Massive press attention. Yet all they said is that it's not really important because it takes place anyway. International concerns are voiced out anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that an increase in how international concerns are given light means that there's greater significance in the G20. Lastly, with regards to business and the exchange of ideas and technology transfers, this point they have neglected, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, solution through communication, progress through dialogue. Thank you.
Speaker has spoken for 4 minutes 13 seconds.
Now I'd like to welcome the government reply to the podium.
I'll give you 4 reasons why the government should win today. The first reason is very simple. It's because they're unfair. They made me flow during their whip and reply speech. Among the plethora of new arguments I faced, I found one very exclusive argument. The new argument that was introduced during the the opposition whip speech was that because the G20 is so new and young, that we can't really expect any practical implications. They say that anything passes as practical implications because we're still in the progress. I'll be talking about the difference between basis for practical implications and practical implications in the future as well. But as for now, I'd like to say they've been greatly unfair in introducing new arguments that I feel the need to rebut first off. So that's the first reason why we should win. The second reason why we take this debate is because their argument was entirely based on the fallacy of begging the question. I quote the deputy leader of opposition. She said, "It is the burden of the government to prove that no practical implications exist. We told you a variety of reasons why they don't exist. We told you that there aren't any binding measures, therefore the states don't have an incentive to cooperate with each other." They responded by saying, "Of course they do. We gave you the example of China versus America. No further engagement." We take it that there is no incentive because that's reality. Secondly, we talked about how major powers such as Norway are excluded from the discussion, and therefore these discussions can't really reach agreement. Thirdly, we talked about conflicting, contradictory interests inside the G20. We talked about how developing countries inside the G20 don't benefit from the resolutions that it reaches, although these resolutions aren't carried out anyway. What they continue to say is that as long as we don't prove that God doesn't exist, they succeed in proving that God does exist. What kind of examples did they bring to the table? None. Their argument was based on the logical fallacy that we failed to prove that something doesn't exist. We gave you reasons why it doesn't exist. We told you that it doesn't exist. What more can we do? That's the second reason why we take this debate home. The third reason we take this debate home is because they mistook two different terms. First, the basis for practical implications. Secondly, practical implications themselves. Anything can be a basis for a practical implication. Me saying, I'm going to save the world is a basis for practical implication. If I actually go out and fight for gay rights, animal rights, that's a practical implication. They showed us communication. That's the only benefit they mentioned. Communications and agreements that will one day reach, blossom, and become practical implications. These are not the same as practical implications. The only two examples they gave us was, first of all, the $1 trillion binding agreement that reached the IMF, which didn't happen. Even if it did, they didn't show us what kind of results it yielded. And secondly, when I asked their second speaker to give me one practical implication of this year's G20 summit, she told me that they identified the reason behind the 2008 financial crisis. How are these practical implications? They aren't. That's the third reason. Fourthly, and finally, they simply didn't engage in debate. First off, we rebutted their first argument of communication and about a lot of communication. We told you that communication doesn't result in anything in itself. No engagement further. Secondly, we rebutted their point on a lot of media attention. This point was untouched upon until their reply. We told you that a lot of media attention only focuses on the event itself, not the material that the event deals with. Therefore, no benefits that they promise. Wasn't engaged with. Thirdly, we talked about how G20 harms developing nations, how it's contradictory in itself to help its own member nations. Didn't engage with. Fourthly, about the BRICS versus the original Western powers, BRICS versus America, USA versus China. They told us that they would wait and see what happens. We can't see that as engagement. Fourthly, and finally, they didn't engage. Because of these four reasons, today, you must vote for the government. Thank you.